Have you ever been in a situation where a single word completely changed the meaning of your conversation? Imagine saying one thing in English, but the other person hears something entirely different. Today's story will make you laugh, relate, and most importantly, help you avoid common language misunderstandings that can happen to anyone learning English. Hello, wonderful learners, and welcome back to LMJ English. So I'm thrilled to have you join us for another exciting story that will boost your English skills while entertaining you. If you're new here, this channel is dedicated to helping you master English through engaging stories that teach practical vocabulary, pronunciation, and cultural insights. Before we dive into today's hilarious tale about a traveler's language mix-up, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our new stories. Your support helps us create more free English learning content for listeners worldwide. Today's story follows Sofia, a brave young woman traveling alone to an English-speaking country with limited language skills. What starts as a simple taxi ride turns into an unforgettable comedy of errors when her tired pronunciation creates a mix-up between two very similar-sounding words, rest and wrestle. This confusion leads to one of the funniest and most awkward taxi rides you can imagine. So sit back, relax, and join us on this language learning adventure. Remember, the best way to improve your English is to immerse yourself in stories like this one. Let's begin. Sofia's language learning journey. Sofia had always dreamed of traveling abroad, but one thing always held her back: her limited English skills. Growing up in a small town in Mexico, she had studied English in school but rarely had opportunities to practice with native speakers. The textbook phrases she memorized seemed worlds away from the fast, natural English she heard in movies and songs. Despite her hesitation, Sofia was determined not to let language barriers prevent her from experiencing the world. After saving money for 3 years working at her family's restaurant, Sofia finally booked a 2-week trip to New York City. If not now, when? She thought while clicking the confirm button on her flight reservation. Her hands trembled slightly, excitement mixed with fear. She had 6 months to prepare, and she was determined to make the most of it. Each morning before work, Sofia practiced English for 1 hour. She downloaded language apps, watched YouTube videos without subtitles, and even joined an online conversation group. The progress was slow, but steady. She created flashcards for essential travel phrases. Where is, how much, I would like, and practiced them while cooking, cleaning, and before bed. Her pronunciation improved, though certain sounds still tripped her up. The difference between sheet and seat, beach and bitch, made her nervous about potential embarrassing mistakes. As her departure date approached, Sofia's confidence grew, but doubt still lingered. Would her English be good enough? Could she handle unexpected situations? Her brother Marco tried to reassure her. "Your English is better than you think," he said. "And remember, most people appreciate when you try to speak their language, even if you make mistakes." The night before her flight, Sofia packed and repacked her suitcase, making sure everything was perfect. She included a small notebook with important phrases and addresses. Her phone was loaded with translation apps, maps, and emergency contacts. Though nervous, she felt as prepared as she could be. That night she barely slept, imagining all the adventures awaiting her in New York. The towering skyscrapers, the bustling streets, the diverse cultures. All of it would soon be real, not just images on a screen. When her alarm sounded at 4 a.m., Sofia was already awake. She dressed quickly, her mind racing through mental checklists. Her parents drove her to the airport, offering last-minute advice and concerns. "Remember to call us when you land," her mother said, hugging her tightly, "and be careful with strangers." Sofia nodded, suddenly feeling like a child again despite being 27 years old. As she walked toward the security checkpoint, passport and boarding pass in hand, a mixture of emotions washed over her. Fear, excitement, pride, all swirled together as she waved goodbye to her parents. Whatever challenges awaited her in New York, she would face them. This journey wasn't just about seeing a new city, it was about proving to herself that she could overcome her fears and connect with people despite language differences. Little did she know that her first real English test would come sooner than expected, in the form of a chatty taxi driver and a pronunciation mistake that would lead to one of the most memorable experiences of her trip. Arrival in the English-speaking world. The plane touched down with a gentle bump that stirred Sofia from her half-sleep. After 14 hours of travel, including a connecting flight, she had finally arrived in New York City. The captain's voice came over the intercom, first in English, then in Spanish. "Welcome to John F. Kennedy International Airport. Local time is 4:45 p.m. and the temperature is 68 degrees Fahrenheit." Sofia felt a flutter of excitement in her stomach. This was real. She was actually here. As passengers began standing and retrieving bags from overhead compartments, Sofia's phone buzzed. It was a message from her mobile carrier. "Welcome to the USA. Enjoy your trip." She smiled at this small confirmation of her arrival. The journey through the airport became Sofia's first immersion in English. Everywhere she looked, signs, advertisements, and announcements bombarded her with English words. Some were familiar from her studies, while others seemed completely new. At the immigration desk, Sofia rehearsed her answers mentally. When the officer called her forward, she handed over her passport with a slightly trembling hand. "Purpose of your visit?" the officer asked, his face expressionless. "Tourism," Sofia replied, pronouncing it carefully. "Length of stay?" 2 weeks. The officer looked at her, then at her passport, then back at her. After what felt like an eternity, he stamped her passport, handed it back, and said, "Welcome to the United States." Sofia released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. First test passed. Following the crowd, Sofia made her way to baggage claim. The conveyor belt was already moving when she arrived, and she positioned herself near where she thought her bag might appear. Around her, conversations in English blended into a sea of sound. She caught fragments, mentions of hotels, questions about transportation, complaints about the flight. Though she couldn't understand everything, she was surprised by how much she did comprehend. When her purple suitcase appeared, Sofia grabbed it and followed signs to the exit. Now came the next challenge: finding transportation to her hotel. She had researched options before her trip and decided that a taxi would be simplest for her first day, despite the expense. Following signs marked ground transportation, she emerged into the humid New York afternoon. The noise and energy hit her immediately. Cars honking, announcements blaring, people shouting for taxis. It was overwhelming but exhilarating. Sofia spotted the taxi line and joined the queue of travelers. When her turn came, a coordinator pointed her toward a yellow cab. The driver, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, jumped out to help with her luggage. "Where to?" he asked once they were both inside the vehicle. Sofia had practiced this moment. She took a deep breath and said clearly, "Hotel Westside, please. It's in Manhattan." The driver nodded, got it, and merged into traffic. As the taxi navigated away from the airport, Sofia gazed out the window, taking in her first glimpses of New York. The expressway was crowded with cars. and in the distance, she could see the famous skyline beginning to take shape. Her senses were overwhelmed with new sights, sounds, and even smells. Despite her exhaustion from the long journey, excitement kept her alert. She had done it, successfully navigated the airport, communicated her needs, and was now on her way to her hotel. Maybe this language barrier wouldn't be as difficult as she had feared. Little did she know that her real English test was about to begin with a simple question from her chatty taxi driver. The taxi conversation begins. The taxi sped along the highway, weaving between lanes with the confidence that seemed unique to New York drivers. Sofia watched the scenery change from airport surroundings to industrial areas, and finally to the dense urban landscape of the Immersion city. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between buildings, and the windows of skyscrapers reflected golden light. Despite her exhaustion, Sofia couldn't take her eyes off the view. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "First time in New York?" he asked, breaking the silence. Sofia nodded, then realized she should respond verbally. "Yes, first time," she said, proud of how natural the words sounded. The driver smiled. "Where from?" he asked, using the shortened phrase common in casual conversation. Sofia recognized this pattern from her language apps. "Mexico," she replied. "Mexico City." "Ah, Mexico," the driver exclaimed. "Beautiful country. I love Mexican food. Tacos, burritos, enchiladas." He patted his stomach appreciatively. Sofia couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. "Yes, the food is very good," she agreed. This was going well. Simple conversation, but she was managing it. Her confidence grew slightly. As they crossed the bridge into Manhattan, the iconic skyline came into full view. Sofia gasped audibly. The driver chuckled. "Yeah, pretty impressive, right? That's why they call it the concrete jungle." Sofia wasn't familiar with this expression, but nodded anyway. She didn't want to interrupt the flow of conversation by asking for clarification. The taxi navigated through increasingly crowded streets. Pedestrians darted between cars, food vendors called out their offerings, and the sounds of horns, music, and conversations created a symphony of urban noise. Sofia tried to absorb it all, but the combination of sensory overload and jet lag was making her head spin. Her eyelids felt increasingly heavy. "How long your flight?" the driver asked, noticing her fatigue in the mirror. Sofia had to think for a moment to calculate. "About 14 hours, with connection," she managed to say. The driver whistled. "That's a long journey. No wonder you look tired." Sofia nodded again, fighting to keep her eyes open. The movement of the taxi and the warmth of the late afternoon sun were making it difficult to stay alert. "We hit some traffic," the driver commented as they came to a stop at a red light. "But don't worry, I know shortcuts. Get you to your hotel. Quick!" Sofia appreciated his consideration. "Thank you," she said sincerely. The light changed and they turned down a less congested street. The driver continued talking, pointing out landmarks as they passed. "That's the Empire State Building over there. And later, if we go a bit west, you'll see Times Square. Very crowded, lots of lights, very famous." Sofia tried to follow his descriptions, but her exhaustion was making it difficult to focus. The words began to blur together, and she found herself nodding without fully processing what he was saying. What she needed most now was to reach her hotel, check in, and sleep. The thought of a comfortable bed made her even more drowsy. Driver, however, seemed to enjoy having someone to talk to and continued his friendly chatter. "So what brings you to New York? Business, pleasure?" Sofia tried to formulate a coherent response. "Tourism," she said. I want to see famous places. The driver nodded enthusiastically. Oh, you'll love it. So much to see. How long you staying? 2 weeks, Sofia replied, stifling a yawn. As the taxi turned onto another street, Sofia's fatigue reached an overwhelming level. She needed to communicate her exhaustion somehow. Drawing on her English vocabulary, she decided to express her most immediate desire. Taking a deep breath, she said what seemed like a simple sentence. I am very tired. I want to rest. But in her exhausted state, her pronunciation of the word rest came out slightly different than intended, setting the stage for a misunderstanding. That would turn this ordinary taxi ride into an unforgettable language adventure. The epic misunderstanding. The taxi driver's eyebrows shot up, visible in the rearview mirror. I'm sorry, what did you say? He asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and amusement. Sofia, not noticing his reaction, repeated her statement, emphasizing each word. I am very tired. I want to rest. But again, her pronunciation of rest sounded closer to wrestle to the driver's ears. The driver's eyes widened further. You want to wrestle? He asked incredulously. Like professional wrestling. He made a gesture with his arms, mimicking wrestling moves. Sofia stared at him blankly, not understanding the source of confusion. What was he talking about? And what was that strange arm movement? No, Sofia said, shaking her head. Rest. Sleep. She closed her eyes briefly and tilted her head against her hands in the universal gesture for sleeping. The driver burst out laughing, finally understanding the miscommunication. Oh, rest, not wrestle. He emphasized the difference in pronunciation. You want to sleep, not fight, I get it now. Sofia's cheeks flushed with embarrassment as comprehension dawned. Of course, rest and wrestle sounded similar, especially with her accent. She nodded quickly. Yes, rest, sleep. No fighting. The driver was still chuckling, wiping a tear from his eye. That's funny. I thought you were asking me about wrestling. I was thinking, this small lady wants to wrestle. That's unusual. Despite her embarrassment, Sofia couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of the situation. The idea of her, exhausted from travel, challenging someone to a wrestling match was indeed ridiculous. No wrestling, she confirmed, attempting to pronounce the word correctly this time. Just sleep. The driver nodded, still grinning widely. Don't worry, happens all the time. English has many words that sound alike but mean very different things. He seemed genuinely amused rather than annoyed by the confusion. But now I'm curious. Do you like wrestling? You know, WWE? Professional wrestling on TV? Sofia wasn't sure how to respond. She had seen wrestling broadcasts occasionally, but wasn't a fan. Not really, she admitted. In Mexico we have lucha libre? She used the Spanish term, unsure of the English equivalent. The driver's face lit up with recognition. Yes, lucha libre. With the colorful masks, that's awesome. My nephew loves those wrestlers. Before Sofia could respond, the driver continued excitedly. My cousin actually tried to become a professional wrestler. He trained for 2 years but never made it big. Still talks about it all the time, though. He launched into a story about his cousin's wrestling career, complete with animated hand gestures that made Sofia slightly nervous about his attention to the road. The conversation had taken such an unexpected turn that Sofia was now fully awake, despite her exhaustion. What had started as a simple statement about being tired had transformed into an extended discussion about professional wrestling. She listened politely, nodding at appropriate intervals, though much of his rapid speech was difficult to follow. Maybe you should try wrestling, the driver suggested jokingly. Could be a new hobby for your vacation. Sofia laughed and shook her head firmly. No, thank you, too tired for wrestling. She pronounced wrestling carefully this time, determined not to create further confusion. The driver glanced at her. In the mirror again. Just teasing. But seriously, pronunciation in English is tricky. My parents came from Greece and they still mix up words after 30 years here. His openness about language struggles made Sofia feel less self-conscious about her mistake. Perhaps miscommunications were simply part of the language learning process, sometimes awkward, but occasionally leading to unexpected and even humorous interactions. As the taxi continued through the Manhattan streets, Sofia realized that this misunderstanding, embarrassing as it was, had created a genuine human connection that might not have happened otherwise. Sometimes the most memorable experiences came from the mistakes we feared most. And at the very least, she now knew the difference between rest and wrestle, a distinction she wouldn't forget any time soon. Getting lost in translation. The taxi turned onto a busy avenue filled with honking cars and pedestrians rushing in all directions. Sofia was trying to follow their route on her phone's map, but the battery indicator flashed red, only 3% remaining. She silently scolded herself for not charging it fully before leaving the airport. The navigation app showed they should be approaching her hotel soon, but the surroundings didn't match the pictures she had studied online. The driver slowed the taxi, his confident expression replaced with confusion. He leaned forward, squinting. At street signs. That's strange, he muttered, mostly to himself. Sofia felt a twinge of anxiety. Is something wrong? She asked, struggling to keep her voice calm. The driver scratched his head, a gesture she recognized as a sign of puzzlement. I think we might have taken a wrong turn a few blocks back. Your hotel should be around here, but Sofia's heart sank. Lost in an unfamiliar city with a dying phone and limited English, this was exactly the scenario she had dreaded. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that panic wouldn't help. Can you check? Where is hotel? She asked, showing him the hotel reservation on her phone, before the screen went completely black. Perfect timing. The driver frowned at the now useless phone. Battery dead? No problem. I'll figure it out. He pulled over to the curb and reached for his own phone. Hotel Westside, right? Sofia nodded eagerly. Yes, Hotel Westside. The driver typed something, waited, then frowned again. That's what I thought. We should have turned left on 8th Avenue, but I went right. My mistake. Relief washed over Sofia. At least he knew where they had gone wrong. The driver put his phone down and pulled back into traffic. No worry, I fixed this. Just need to go around. A few blocks. His confidence was somewhat reassuring, though Sofia remained anxious. Without her phone's navigation, she had no choice but to trust him completely. As they drove, the driver attempted to lighten the mood with more conversation. So, besides wrestling, he paused to wink at her in the mirror, showing he was joking. What do you want to see in New York? Sofia appreciated his effort to ease the tension. Many things, she replied. Statue of Liberty, Central Park, museums. Listing her planned activities helped distract her from worries about being lost. The taxi made several turns, navigating through increasingly unfamiliar streets. Sofia tried to memorize landmarks, a bright red restaurant, an unusual sculpture outside a building, a corner with particularly vibrant flower planters, in case she needed to find her way back later. The city was a maze of similar-looking blocks, and without her phone she felt vulnerable. After several minutes of driving, the taxi stopped at another red light. The driver drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, looking increasingly concerned. Sofia's anxiety returned. Are we still lost? She asked hesitantly. The driver sighed. I thought this was the right way, but now I'm not sure. These streets all look similar if you don't drive them every day. Sofia's tiredness was now completely overshadowed by worry. What if they couldn't find the hotel? What if her phone was dead and she couldn't call for help? What if her catastrophizing was interrupted when the driver spotted a pedestrian waiting to cross the street? Let me ask that guy, he said decisively. He rolled down the window as the man approached. Excuse me, do you know where Hotel Westside is? Near what cross streets? The pedestrian, a middle-aged man in a business suit, paused. Hotel Westside? That's on 8th Avenue between 47th and 48th. You're on 6th Avenue now, so go 2 blocks that way, he pointed, and then head uptown. Can't miss it. Big blue awning out front. The driver thanked him profusely, then turned to Sofia with a triumphant smile. See? Problem solved. We're not far. He made a U-turn at the next opportunity and headed in the direction the pedestrian had indicated. Sofia felt the tension in her shoulders begin to release. This obstacle, too, was being overcome. As they drove, the driver continued his cheerful banter. This is good lesson for New York. Always know cross streets. Address numbers not enough. And never let your phone die. He laughed, and Sofia joined. Him able to see humor in the situation, now that a solution was in sight. Yes, good lesson, she agreed. Despite the stress of getting lost, Sofia realized she had managed to communicate effectively throughout the ordeal. Perhaps her English was more functional than she had given herself credit for. True to the pedestrian's directions, within minutes, they approached a building with a distinctive blue awning bearing the words Hotel Westside in elegant silver lettering. Sofia almost cried with relief at the sight. After the long flight, the wrestling misunderstanding and the detour, she was finally arriving at her destination. This first day had already provided more English practice and more adventure than she had anticipated, and somehow she had survived it all. Safe arrival and unexpected wisdom. The taxi pulled up smoothly to the curb in front of Hotel Westside. The doorman, dressed in a sharp navy uniform with gold buttons, stepped forward to open Sofia's door. "Welcome to Hotel Westside," he greeted her with a practiced smile. Sofia returned the smile, grateful to have finally reached her destination. After the unexpected detour, the driver popped the trunk and hopped out to retrieve her luggage. As he placed the purple suitcase on the sidewalk, Sofia fumbled in her wallet for payment, including an extra tip for his patience during their adventure. "Thank you very much," she said, handing him the money. The driver accepted it with a nod of appreciation. "It was nice to meet you," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Enjoy your stay in New York." He paused, then added with a mischievous grin, "And remember, rest is for sleeping, wrestle is for fighting." He emphasized the different pronunciations, exaggerating the sounds. Rest versus wrestle. Sofia laughed, her embarrassment from earlier now transformed into amusement. "I will remember," she promised. "No more confusion." The driver gave her a thumbs up. "Your English is good," he said encouragingly. "Don't worry about mistakes, everyone makes them. My first language isn't English either, and I still mix things up sometimes." His kindness touched Sofia. Here was someone who understood the challenges of navigating a foreign language. "Thank you for understanding," she replied sincerely. The driver tapped the roof of his taxi. "That's New York for you. Everyone from somewhere else. Everyone learning something new." With a final wave, he returned to his vehicle and merged back into traffic, disappearing into the flow of yellow cabs and city buses. The doorman, who had been patiently waiting, gestured toward the entrance. "May I help you with your bag, miss?" Sofia nodded gratefully. Yes, please, thank you. She followed him through revolving doors into a lobby gleaming with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The cool, air-conditioned interior was a welcome contrast to the humid evening outside. At the reception desk, Sofia presented her passport and booking confirmation. The clerk, a young woman with an elegant French accent, typed efficiently on her computer. Yes, Ms. Garcia, we have your reservation. A single room for 14 nights. Sofia confirmed this with a nod, relieved that the check-in process was proceeding smoothly. While the clerk prepared her room key, Sofia glanced around the lobby. Travelers from different countries conversed in various languages, creating a multicultural symphony. She caught snippets of French, what sounded like Japanese, and several conversations in English with different accents. This international atmosphere made her feel less self-conscious about her own accent and limited vocabulary. Here is your room key, Ms. Garcia, the clerk said, handing her a sleek card. You're on the 12th floor, room 1242. The elevators are to your right. Breakfast is served from 6:30 to 10 a.m. in the dining room on the mezzanine level. Sofia thanked her and followed the doorman to the elevators. In her room, Sofia finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of her exhaustion. The bed looked heavenly with its crisp white linens and plush pillows. She tipped the doorman, locked the door behind him, and immediately plugged in her phone to charge. Then, without even unpacking, she collapsed onto the bed, kicking off her shoes with a sigh of relief. As she lay there, staring at the ceiling, Sofia replayed the events of her first day in New York. What could have been a series of stressful moments, navigating the airport, communicating with strangers, getting lost in an unfamiliar city, had instead become a story she would someday tell with laughter. Especially the part about accidentally challenging a taxi driver to a wrestling match. The driver's words echoed in her mind. Don't worry about mistakes. Everyone makes them. Perhaps that was the most valuable lesson from today. That perfect language skills weren't necessary for meaningful communication. What mattered more was the willingness to try, to laugh at mistakes, and to keep going despite the occasional misunderstanding. Sofia's eyelids grew heavy as these thoughts drifted through her mind. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, and undoubtedly new language mishaps. But she would face them with more confidence now, knowing that even in this massive city of 8 million people, there was kindness to be found in unexpected places, like in the front seat of a yellow taxi, from a driver who took the time to help a tired traveler understand the difference between resting and wrestling. Life lessons. From language mistakes. Sofia woke the next morning feeling refreshed and energized. Sunlight streamed through the gap in the curtains, painting a bright stripe across the hotel room floor. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then memories of yesterday's journey flooded back. The long flight, the airport navigation, and of course the memorable taxi ride with the wrestling misunderstanding. She smiled at the recollection, already able to see humor in what had felt mortifying at the time. After a quick shower, Sofia felt ready to begin her first full day in New York. As she applied her makeup in the bathroom mirror, she practiced English phrases aloud, paying particular attention to the pronunciation of rest versus wrestle. The incident had made her more conscious of subtle differences in English sounds. I need to rest, she said carefully. Not wrestle. Rest. The distinction was clear when she focused, but she understood how easily such sounds could blur together. In casual, tired speech. Over breakfast in the hotel's dining room, Sofia planned her day's activities. The concierge had recommended starting with a walk through Central Park, followed by a visit to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Both were within walking distance of the hotel. As she sipped her coffee, Sofia overheard conversations at nearby tables. Business people discussed meetings, tourists debated which attractions to visit, and hotel staff greeted guests in polished English. She tried to absorb it all, mentally noting interesting phrases and pronunciation patterns. Before leaving the hotel, Sofia approached the front desk to ask for directions. The clerk, different from the one who had checked her in yesterday, smiled attentively. "Excuse me," Sofia began, pronouncing each word with care. "Could you tell me how to walk to Central Park from here?" The question came out clearly and correctly, boosting her confidence. "Certainly," the clerk replied. "Exit the hotel and turn right. Walk 3 blocks east to 5th Avenue, then head north. You'll reach the park entrance in about 10 minutes. Sofia thanked her, pleased that the exchange had gone smoothly. No misunderstandings, no confused looks, just straightforward communication. Sofia walked the bustling New York streets. She noticed herself picking up snippets of passing conversations, understanding more than she expected. The immersion in English was already sharpening her comprehension. Street signs, advertisements, and store names added to her vocabulary with every block. She paused to take photos occasionally, sending them to her family with brief messages. "Made it to New York. Walking to Central Park." Each message was a small victory, proof that she was managing this adventure on her own. At a crosswalk, Sofia overheard an elderly couple consulting a map. They spoke with what sounded like German accents, struggling to locate a museum. Without thinking, Sofia approached them. "Excuse me, are you looking for a museum?" The words came naturally, without the self-consciousness that usually accompanied her English attempts. The couple looked up with relieved expressions. "Yes, the Metropolitan Museum. Is it far?" the woman asked. Sofia felt a surge of pride. Not only had she understood their question, but she could actually help. "I am going there too," she replied. "It's near Central Park. We can walk together, if you want." The couple gratefully accepted, and suddenly Sofia found herself not just a tourist but a guide, albeit one with a map app. As they walked together, Sofia learned the couple was from Munich, visiting their daughter who studied at New York University. They had been in the city for 3 days already and shared recommendations for restaurants and less crowded viewing times at popular attractions. Sofia listened intently, occasionally asking questions when something wasn't clear. What struck her most was how patient they were, never seeming frustrated when she needed something repeated or explained differently. When they reached the museum entrance, the German woman touched Sofia's arm. "Your English is very good," she said kindly. Sofia laughed. "Thank you, but I made a funny mistake yesterday. I told a taxi driver I wanted to wrestle instead of rest." The couple chuckled appreciatively. "Oh, we have many stories like that, too," the man assured her. "Last year in London, my wife asked for directions to the beach but pronounced it like bitch. The poor woman she asked looked so shocked." They all laughed together, and Sofia felt a warm sense of camaraderie. Here were fellow language learners who understood the journey, the mistakes, the embarrassments, and the small triumphs. Before parting ways, they exchanged information, promising to meet for dinner later in the week. As Sofia wandered through the museum's vast collections, she reflected on how her perspective on language learning was shifting. Yesterday's taxi ride had taught her that mistakes weren't just inevitable, they were valuable. That single pronunciation error had created a memorable interaction, a story to tell, and even a lesson in English phonetics she wouldn't soon forget. More importantly, it had shown her that most people responded to language struggles not with judgment, but with kindness and understanding. Perhaps the most intimidating aspect of learning a new language wasn't the grammar rules or vocabulary lists, but the fear of looking foolish. Yet here she was, less than 24 hours into her trip, already accumulating evidence that such fears were largely unfounded. The taxi driver had laughed with her, not at her. The German couple had shared their own language blunders freely. Even in this massive, fast-paced city, people seemed willing to slow down, listen more carefully, and bridge the communication gap. Sofia stopped before a massive painting, taking in its details while a nearby museum guide explained its historical context to a tour group. She caught most of what the guide was saying, filling in gaps through context. 2 weeks ago, she might have avoided such tours, afraid of missing too much information. Now she made a mental note to join one later, perhaps not understanding everything, but learning what she could, asking questions when necessary, and accepting that perfect comprehension wasn't required for meaningful appreciation. As she continued, through the museum galleries, Sofia felt lighter somehow. The pressure she had placed on herself to speak perfectly, to avoid all errors, was lifting. In its place grew something more valuable: the confidence to communicate despite imperfections, to connect across language barriers, and to find humor rather than shame in the inevitable mistakes. That misplaced W in rest had taught her more than any textbook chapter on pronunciation ever could. Reflections on the language learning journey. 2 weeks passed quickly, filled with sightseeing, shopping, and countless conversations with people from around the world. Sofia's last evening in New York found her sitting on a bench in Bryant Park, watching the sunset paint the surrounding skyscrapers in gold. Tomorrow she would board her flight back to Mexico, carrying with her not just souvenirs and photographs, but a newfound confidence in her English abilities. Sofia opened her journal and reviewed the notes she'd kept throughout her trip. Each day she had recorded new vocabulary, useful phrases, and any language mistakes or misunderstandings. What had begun as a practical exercise became a chronicle of her evolving relationship with English. The first entry described the now famous rest versus wrestle incident in detail. Reading it now made her smile rather than cringe. Over the past 2 weeks, there had been other misunderstandings, of course. She'd ordered a sign instead of a sign in a bookstore, confused beach with beach when discussing trees in Central Park, and accidentally told a barista she was leaving New York when she meant she was living there temporarily. Each error had led to a moment of clarification, often accompanied by friendly explanations from patient locals. But more numerous than the mistakes were the successes. She'd successfully navigated the subway system, asking for directions when needed. She'd held lengthy conversations with shop owners, tour guides, and fellow tourists. She'd even made friends with a group of international students, meeting them twice for dinner, where they conversed in a lively mix of English and occasional words from their native languages. Sofia closed her journal and looked up at the darkening sky, reflecting on how much had changed in just 14 days. Before this trip, she had viewed her limited English as a barrier, something that separated her from authentic experiences and genuine connections. She had focused obsessively on what she couldn't say or might say incorrectly. Now she understood that language wasn't a wall, but a bridge, sometimes rickety and incomplete, but a bridge nonetheless. Most importantly, she had learned that native English speakers weren't the harsh judges she had feared. The taxi driver's good-natured laughter at her resting confusion had set the tone for her entire trip. People appreciated her efforts to communicate, often offering help with difficult words or phrases. Some even shared their own experiences learning Spanish, creating moments of mutual understanding and respect. A memory from earlier in the week came to mind. She'd been having coffee at a small cafe when she overheard an American couple at the next table struggling with basic Spanish. Phrases preparing for their upcoming trip to Barcelona. Without hesitation, Sofia had introduced herself and offered assistance. "The H is silent in Spanish," she explained, helping them practice greetings and simple questions. Their gratitude had been obvious, as was their relief when Sofia assured them that Spanish speakers would appreciate their efforts, however imperfect. "Just like I appreciate when people try to speak Spanish, even with mistakes," she had told them. Communication is about connecting, not perfection. The words had flowed naturally, and only later did Sofia realize she had expressed this complex idea entirely in English, without hesitation or self-consciousness. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had become the encouraging language expert she once desperately needed. As twilight deepened over Bryant Park, Sofia gathered her belongings and began walking back to her hotel. The streets of New York, which had seemed so intimidating 2 weeks ago, now felt almost familiar. She navigated with confidence, occasionally exchanging smiles or brief conversations with strangers. The city had become a classroom where every interaction offered a lesson in practical living English. Tomorrow, when her plane landed in Mexico, friends and family would ask about her trip. They would want to hear about the famous landmarks, the shopping, the food. But Sofia knew that her most valuable souvenir couldn't be photographed or packed in a suitcase. It was the understanding that language learning wasn't about achieving perfection, but about building connections despite imperfections. It was about having the courage to speak up, the humility to laugh at mistakes, and the persistence to keep trying. The rest versus wrestle misunderstanding, which had seemed so mortifying in the moment, had become her favorite story to tell. It embodied everything she had learned about language and communication, how a single misplaced sound could create confusion, how humor could bridge the gap, and how such moments often led to deeper connections than perfect forgettable exchanges. As Sofia entered her hotel lobby for the last time, she greeted the receptionist by name. "Good evening, Miss Garcia," the woman replied. "All packed for your flight tomorrow?" Sofia nodded. "Yes, all ready," she answered, the words coming easily now. "This was an amazing trip." The receptionist smiled. "We're glad you enjoyed your stay, and your English is excellent, by the way." "Thank you," Sofia replied, thinking of how far she had come from that first day when she accidentally invited a taxi driver to wrestle. "I'm still learning, but I'm not afraid of making mistakes anymore." And that, she realized, was perhaps the most important phrase she had mastered on this journey, not in a language book or app, but through lived experience in the vibrant, forgiving classroom of New York City. The power of embracing language errors. Learning a new language is like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces constantly change shape. Just when you think you've mastered one aspect, vocabulary perhaps, or basic grammar, another challenge emerges. For many language learners, the fear of making mistakes becomes the biggest obstacle of all. We worry about mispronouncing words, using incorrect grammar, or misunderstanding cultural contexts. We imagine native speakers judging us harshly for these errors, perhaps even laughing at our attempts. Sofia's story reminds us that reality is usually quite different from these fears. Her misunderstanding with the taxi driver, confusing rest with wrestle, created not mockery but connection. The driver didn't dismiss her for the error. Instead, he engaged with her more deeply because of it. What could have been a forgettable ride became a memorable human interaction, complete with laughter, cultural exchange, and mutual learning. This pattern repeated throughout Sofia's journey in New York. Each mistake became a doorway rather than a dead end. When she mispronounced sign as seen in a bookstore, the clerk not only corrected her gently, but also shared a story about struggling with Spanish pronunciation during his semester abroad in Madrid. When she confused beach with beach while discussing trees in Central Park, her tour guide used the opportunity to explain how many English words are distinguished only by a slight variation in vowel sounds, a mini lesson in phonetics, delivered with kindness rather than condescension. What Sofia discovered is something linguists and language teachers have long understood. Errors are not just inevitable in language learning, they're essential. They demonstrate that the learner is taking risks, pushing beyond memorized phrases into authentic communication. They create opportunities for feedback and correction that no textbook exercise can replicate. And perhaps most importantly, they humanize the language learning process, turning it from a clinical academic pursuit into a series of real human connections. Consider how children learn their first language. They make countless errors, saying goed instead of went or foots instead of feet. Adults rarely respond with harsh correction. Instead, they model the correct forms naturally through conversation. The child's utterance is valued for its communicative intent rather than its technical correctness. Somehow, as adults learning second languages, we forget this natural process and expect perfection from ourselves immediately. Research in second language acquisition supports what Sofia experienced intuitively during her New York adventure. Studies show that language learners who are willing to make mistakes and continue speaking despite errors ultimately achieve higher proficiency than those who remain silent until they can produce perfect sentences. The willingness to communicate through imperfection, what linguists call communicative competence, proves more valuable than technical mastery in isolation. Sofia's journey also highlights the role of emotional factors in language learning. At the beginning of her trip, anxiety and self-consciousness hindered her communication attempts. Each successful interaction, however, built her confidence incrementally. By the end of her 2 weeks, the positive feedback loop was firmly established. Greater confidence led to more willingness to communicate, which led to more practice opportunities, which improved her skills and further boosted her confidence. The taxi driver's good-natured response to Sofia's wrestle-rest confusion served as a crucial first step in this cycle. Had he reacted with impatience or ridicule, Sofia might have retreated into silence for the remainder of her trip, speaking English only when absolutely necessary. Instead, his response showed her that mistakes could be forgiven, even appreciated as part of the authentic human experience of crossing language barriers. This insight transformed Sofia's approach to language learning. Rather than seeing English as a formal system to be mastered perfectly before use, she began to view it as a living tool for connection, where effectiveness mattered more than flawlessness. She discovered that most native speakers valued her attempts to communicate in their language, appreciating the effort and respect it demonstrated, even when her execution was imperfect. Perhaps the most powerful lesson from Sofia's experience is how language mishaps can become cherished memories and meaningful stories. Years from now, she won't remember most of the technically correct exchanges she had in New York, the routine greetings, the standard transactions, the textbook perfect questions and answers, but she will always remember the taxi ride where rest became wrestle, not because it was embarrassing, but because it was authentic, human, and ultimately transformative. For anyone struggling with a new language, Sofia's story offers valuable encouragement. Yes, you will make mistakes. Yes, some of them might create momentary confusion or embarrassment, but these errors rarely have the catastrophic social consequences we fear. More often, they create opportunities for genuine human connection across linguistic and cultural boundaries, connections based not on perfect performance but on shared humanity, humor, and the universal experience of trying to understand and be understood. So perhaps the next time you hesitate to speak in a language you're learning, remembering Sofia and her wrestling mix-up might give you the courage to continue. Your errors might lead to laughter, but that laughter can build bridges stronger than any perfectly constructed sentence ever could. In the grand conversation of human communication, being understood matters infinitely more than being perfect, and sometimes the path to being understood winds through delightful misunderstandings along the way. The journey continues beyond words. Language is more than just a collection of vocabulary and grammar rules. It's a living bridge between different worlds of experience. When Sofia boarded her flight to New York with her limited English skills, she wasn't simply embarking on a tourist visit, she was crossing a threshold into a new way of perceiving, thinking, and connecting. Her journey with the English language didn't end when she returned to Mexico. In many ways, it had only just begun. Back home, Sofia found herself noticing aspects of English that had previously escaped her attention. Watching movies without subtitles became an engaging challenge rather than a frustrating impossibility. Song lyrics that once blurred into incomprehensible sounds now revealed their poetry and wordplay. Even the English phrases printed on T-shirts and advertisements in her hometown took on new meaning, sometimes making her smile at translations that didn't quite capture the intended message. The confidence Sofia had gained in New York spilled over into other areas of her life. At work, she volunteered to help with English-speaking clients, turning what had once been an anxiety-inducing task into an opportunity for practice and growth. She joined an online language exchange program, helping others with Spanish while continuing to refine her English skills. The reciprocal nature of these exchanges reminded her of what she had learned in New York, that language learning wasn't a one-way street of struggle, but a mutual journey of connection. Perhaps most significantly, Sofia's relationship with making mistakes underwent a fundamental transformation. Before her trip, errors had felt like personal failures, evidence of inadequacy. Now she recognized them as necessary stepping stones on the path to fluency. When she confused embarrassed with pregnant during a video call with an American colleague, a classic mix-up for Spanish speakers, she laughed along with them rather than retreating into shame. Each mistake became not a stop sign but a signpost, pointing toward areas for growth. Sofia began keeping a mistake journal, recording errors she made or observed, along with the correct forms. This practice transformed potential embarrassments into learning opportunities. The journal's first entry, naturally, recounted the taxi driver's confusion between rest and wrestle. Below it, she noted the subtle difference in vowel sounds and the importance of the W pronunciation. What had once been a source of anxiety was now approached with the analytical curiosity of a language detective. As months passed, Sofia noticed an unexpected development in her relationship with her native Spanish. Her deeper understanding of English brought new insights into her first language. She became more aware of idioms, cultural references, and linguistic patterns in Spanish that she had previously taken for granted. The perspective gained from standing outside one language helped her see another with fresh eyes. Bilingualism, she realized, wasn't just about knowing two languages. It was about inhabiting a unique space between them, where both were illuminated in new ways. On social media, Sofia began sharing her language learning stories, including the famous wrestle incident. To her surprise, these posts resonated with followers from around the world. People commented with their own language mishap stories. The French student who asked for a préservatif, condom, instead of conservateur, preservative, for their sandwich. The Japanese learner who accidentally told their host family they were pregnant when trying to say they were embarrassed. These shared experiences created a community of learners who could laugh together at the universal aspects of language acquisition. 6 months after her New York trip, Sofia received a message from an unexpected source, the German couple she had met outside the Metropolitan Museum. They were planning a visit to Mexico and wondered if she might recommend places to visit near her hometown. This correspondence blossomed into a friendship conducted in a blend of English, Spanish, and occasional German phrases. They eventually visited, and Sofia showed them around her city with the same confidence she had developed navigating New York. The languages they shared formed a bridge stronger than any single perfect translation could have provided. One evening, while helping her teenage cousin with English homework, Sofia shared her rest versus wrestle story. Her cousin laughed, then admitted she had been avoiding speaking English in class for fear of saying something wrong. "But what's the worst that could happen?" Sofia asked. "You say something funny, people laugh, and then life goes on. Meanwhile, you learn something you'll never forget." The advice seemed to resonate. The following week, her cousin proudly reported participating in an entire English class discussion, despite making several mistakes. This ripple effect, how one person's willingness to embrace language imperfection could inspire others, became increasingly apparent to Sofia. Her journey wasn't just personal. It was part of a broader human story about connection across differences. When she eventually enrolled in formal English classes to continue improving, she approached them not as a struggling student, but as an experienced traveler returning to map territory she had already begun to explore. The English language would always contain challenges for Sofia, idiomatic expressions that defied literal translation, cultural references that required contextual knowledge, pronunciation subtleties that her Spanish-trained ear sometimes missed. But these challenges no longer appeared as insurmountable barriers. They were simply features of the landscape, sometimes requiring careful navigation, but always part of the adventure rather than obstacles to it. Sofia kept the taxi driver's words pinned to her bulletin board. Rest is for sleeping, wrestle is for fighting. The simple phonetic reminder had become something of a personal philosophy. Language learning, like life itself, wasn't about achieving perfect comprehension or expression. It was about engaging authentically with an imperfect process. Sometimes resting in what you already knew, sometimes wrestling with new challenges, but always moving forward, one conversation at a time. Well, my dear English learners, we've come to the end of Sofia's memorable language journey. From her nervous taxi ride with that wrestling misunderstanding to becoming confident in her communication skills. I hope her story has not only entertained you, but also inspired you on your own English learning path. Remember that every English learner, whether beginner or advanced, faces moments of confusion, embarrassment, and those funny misunderstandings. These aren't failures, but rather valuable stepping stones toward fluency. Just like Sofia discovered, the willingness to make mistakes and laugh at them often creates the most meaningful connections and memorable learning experiences. If you enjoyed today's story, please help us spread the language learning love by hitting that like button and sharing this video with friends who might need a bit of encouragement with their English studies. And of course, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more engaging stories that help you improve your English in a natural, enjoyable way. What about you? Have you ever had a funny language mix-up like Sofia's rest versus wrestle confusion? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear about your language learning adventures. Thank you so much for learning with us today. Until next time, keep practicing, stay confident, and remember that perfect English isn't needed for perfect communication, just an open heart and a willingness to connect. See you in our next video. Key vocabulary: immersion, noun. The act of becoming completely involved in an activity or interest. Example: total immersion in an English-speaking environment is one of the best ways to learn the language quickly. Misunderstanding, noun. A failure to understand something correctly. Example: the misunderstanding between Sofia and the taxi driver created an awkward but memorable situation. Pronunciation, noun. The way in which a word is pronounced. Example: Sofia worked hard to improve her pronunciation of difficult English sounds. Confidence, noun. The feeling or belief that one can rely on someone or something. Firm trust. Example: with each successful conversation, Sofia's confidence in speaking English grew stronger. Navigate, verb. To find one's way through an area. Example: Sofia had to navigate the busy streets of New York with only her basic English skills. Embarrassment, noun. A feeling of self-consciousness, shame, or awkwardness. Example: Sofia's initial embarrassment about the wrestling mistake soon turned into an amusing anecdote. Communication, noun. The imparting or exchanging of information by speaking, writing, or using some other medium. Example: despite her limited vocabulary, Sofia managed to establish effective communication with locals. Fluency, noun. The ability to express oneself easily and articulately. Example: Sofia realized that fluency comes not from perfection but from practice and persistence. Misinterpret, verb. To interpret wrongly, misunderstand. Example: the taxi driver misinterpreted Sofia's tired pronunciation of rest as wrestle. Perseverance, noun. Persistence in doing something despite difficulty or delay in achieving success. Example: Sofia's perseverance in speaking English despite her fears led to remarkable improvement. Barrier, noun. A circumstance or obstacle that keeps people or things apart. Example: language differences can create barriers, but they can also be overcome with patience and humor. Encounter, noun. An unexpected or casual meeting with someone or something. Example: Sofia's encounter with the taxi driver taught her more than any textbook could. Overwhelmed, adjective. Buried or drowned beneath a huge mass of something. Defeated completely. Example: at first, Sofia felt overwhelmed by the fast English conversations all around her. Clarify, verb. To make a statement or situation less confused and more comprehensible. Example: Sofia tried to clarify what she meant by using hand gestures and simpler words. Authentic, adjective. Of undisputed origin and not a copy. Genuine. Example: Sofia wanted authentic conversations with native speakers, not just rehearsed. Textbook dialogues. Progress, a noun. Forward or onward movement toward a destination. Example: Sofia could see real progress in her English skills after just 2 weeks of immersion. Connection, noun. A relationship in which a person or thing is linked or associated with something else. Example: the taxi ride created an unexpected connection between Sofia and the driver despite the language gap. Perspective, noun. A particular attitude toward or way of regarding something, a point of view. Example: the trip gave Sofia a new perspective on language learning as a journey, not a destination. Persistence, noun. Firm or obstinate continuance in a course of action despite difficulty or opposition. Example: Sofia's persistence in speaking English even when tired led to her memorable wrestling mix-up. Transform, verb. Make a thorough or dramatic change in the form, appearance, or character of. Example: the New York experience transformed Sofia's approach to learning English forever.